Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Vivid Voltage, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using the code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be going over my buy list for Vivid Voltage. As you all know, the set isn't entirely impressive, but there are still a lot of things that I would recommend picking up, and a few extra things that we can certainly have fun with on the ladder. Let's start off with the core essentials. These are going to be the cards that I believe are going to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders, or have a ton of future potential. We're going to start off at the bottom, actually, with the Talonflame, Jirachi, and Snorlax. I think these three really are just like good starting-based Pokemon that basically challenge the norms that we have right now in the format of having basically Stellar Wish or just pure Dedenne Crobat-based draw. I really do think there'll be a handful of decks that will at least consider this option, because these are such versatile abilities and attacks in Talonflame's instance, that they're all pretty much worth picking up. Now, I do know Jirachi is pretty pricey, so you may not need the full 4 copies. You can try having like 2 copies. I think that is a slightly different to the Stellar Wish-based Jirachi, where you pretty much need to play 4 copies in most decks if you are going to look to build around it. Whereas this card, you can sort of just have it as like a 1 or 2 count in your deck and just play 1 or 2 U-turn boards if it makes sense in the deck, and then every now and then, you know, you have a nice free retreat pivot for you that gets you a bit of extra value. Where I do think it's super important is the Colossal deck, where you're going to play many copies of it because it has internal synergy with Eruption Shot. So that's why we have the full 4 count here. Snorlax, I'm not entirely enamored with, and I'm still in my own builds of Pokemon decks that I'm making right now in Vivid Voltage format. Don't have many Snorlax in them at all. I think he is quite slow draw for an engine, but I do think he certainly is an option. At the moment, I'm still leaning towards the Jirachi Prism Star and the Stellar Wish Jirachi over Snorlax because it's more proactive, but I do think there will be certainly a lot of decks that still look towards him. Talonflame V, just because it has a natural inbuilt free retreat and a colorless attack cost that has discard synergy, means it can be thrown into all sorts of different decks as an early game lead, and just giving you more outs to have optimal starters. So I think 2 copies is worth picking up there. As for the VMAXs, Colossal VMAX seems to be the most interesting card. I believe this will probably sit around tier 2, thanks mostly to its type coverage and the fact that it becomes super tanky with the new stone fighting energy. So it's a complete build around. You basically just have your Colossals, and then you probably have like Galarian Surfetched as your backup attackers. Those are the main things that I've used so far in the list. So you do need to have a thick line here if you do want to look to play Colossal. Aegislash is slightly different. I would definitely encourage picking up one Aegislash V, because it's pretty much instantly put into Arceus Dialga Palkia with Zacian, and it could also be played in Luke Metal Zacian as well. So Aegislash is guaranteed. The VMAX is slightly more speculative. I do like Max Hack's way. Well, it just ramps really quickly. Once ADP is done, you know, it's GX attack and you've taken 3 prize cards. If you've already done that GX attack, you get the additional 90 from taking 3 prize cards. You have that base of 160, so that gets you to 250, and then the hidden buff of damage from ADP in the first place pushes you to 280. So basically, once you've taken a 3 prize knockout, you're able to get through all tag teams. And if tag teams remain relevant in the format, this Aegislash VMAX might be a nice include to those sorts of decks. So it could also give the Luke Metal a new dimension in terms of reaching higher damage output in the late game as well. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this became a 1-1 line in a lot of those Zacian-based builds, because Max Hack is just really powerful late game, and it's relatively efficient. It's the same setup as it would be for a Zacian, so that's a really nice thing to potentially have in the back pocket. The final Pokemon on this slide is going to be Electrode. We've seen that Pikarom has continued to perform well in the format. It's still hanging on in there. And Electrode does add a new dimension to Pikarom potentially, where you can be more stamp focused and more disruption focused, because Bazap Generator is knocking itself out to accelerate energies in those early turns. Alternatively, it could be a new way of playing Bolton V. It could also be a new way of building around a pure Raichu based deck. Again, going back to Reset Stamp being a big option here, where you're paralyzing in combination with putting your opponent down to a small hand size. I do believe that will probably be around a tier 2 deck as well, depending on how popular Colossal actually gets, because obviously Lightning's in a strange place right now where it gets caught in the crossfire. Colossal is trying to capitalize on the Eternatus matchup, but also any Lightning decks still floating around do get punished. So I believe Lightning will still kind of just teeter on in there and hang on. And Electrode might be a big reason for that. So yeah, it's certainly an optional pickup, and I think it's a pretty reasonable ability. For special energies, Coating Metal seems very, very good. For Luke Metalization, once again, I mentioned it with the Aegislash, Luke Metal seems to be on the up because you have a slightly better way of now protecting yourself from the fire matchups. Obviously, this is way better than Weak Guard Energy because it works off your Zations much better. So yeah, you don't need to have a full 4 copies because oftentimes, as you know, with Zacian decks, you want to have plenty of outs to your Metal Sources and Intrepid Sword in the first place, so 3 should be sufficient, especially because you're likely going to be a tag call based deck because you're still playing Luke Metal, so squeezing in 1 Guz Howler and having 3 Coating Metal should give you plenty of access to it. The Stone Fighting Energy not only is incredible immediately for Colossal, but going forward, this has just so much potential for all fighting decks in the future, so definitely one worth picking up, even if you're not looking to get the Colossals. For the supporters, Leon and Nessa seem to be the most interesting ones. Leon being universal damage mod, which can just become useful in so many situations. I think picking up 2 makes a lot of sense here. If you are looking to play the Charizard deck, you will have to go for a full 4 copies, though. Quick anecdote on that as well. Obviously, the Charizard theme deck actually does contain 2 copies of Leon, so if you're looking to play the Charizard deck, you can do it quite easily by picking up a couple theme decks and then just piecing the rest together from there, so that's a really nice budget option if you are a newer player. Nessa seems very interesting as well. I think out the gates, I'd go ahead and pick up 2 copies because there are plenty of Frostmoth decks in the format. There's Warlord, there's Inteleon, there's new ones on the scene as well, so Nessa seems very reasonable in those sorts of decks. I do think it's going to sit around that 1 and 2 count more often than not because it seems very versatile in those decks. But potentially if you want to go a little bit more rogue with the new Cramorant-based archetype, or potentially the new Steelix, well, not the new Steelix, the old Steelix archetype now gets a new Breath of Life because Nessa can recover 4 Pokemon that are water types that have a full retreat cost, so essentially it recovers 200 damage for you in 1 supporter usage. That could be some fun memes as well. The final card I believe is really worth picking up is going to be Telescopic Sight. There's already a lot of sort of tier 2 decks that are working in a lot of sniping opportunities. There's Cramorants in a handful of archetypes, Pikarom is still around, and Inteleon is certainly a deck that's around, and Telescopic Sight as well may be a strong enough card for you to entirely build new archetypes around based like more fully on spread. Obviously we've seen Salamence kind of flopped, but there's a ton of different archetypes out there that can do big board spreads and really cash in on the damage mod that Telescopic Sight can bring. So definitely an exciting card that I think some archetypes will build around, and there's already some decent homes for it, no matter what. Onto the Believer buy list now. These are cards that may prove themselves to be mid-tier contenders or have a good amount of potential. Basically, I'm not telling you to go out and buy any of these, but if any of them sort of, tickle your fancy, seem interesting to you, or you found a way to make it work for yourself, by all means go ahead and pick them up. These are the sort of numbers that I would be looking for. Orbital VMAX is one of these ones that I think I'll go ahead and grab. I'm going to get lured into play a lot of different Orbital VMAX decks because its ability is super interesting. I've gone for a 2+ on this because I can foresee it being, just a card that you have pivoting in and out for damage here and there in certain archetypes, but also we may even see some all-out orbital-based decks that are really trying to cash in on that ability turn by turn by turn as many times as possible by switching, bird keeping, retreating, all that sort of stuff. So if you are a believer of orbital, you certainly can go down that route. Zarude V seems like an interesting guy for potentially orbital decks, potentially also Rillaboom decks with the VMAX, as it can offer some nice healing. I don't think you ever need more than 2 copies in those sorts of decks, though. Aromatic Grass Energy, I think at the moment is weaker than just basic Grass Energy because many of the Grass decks are based on Rillaboom. So this is going to be one for like a long-term hold if status conditions become important. A couple random sort of one-off Pokemon here. Beedrill has a solid ability with Elusive Master to get yourself back into a good hand size. It also has free retreat, so there's some good stuff going on here. I don't think there's any immediate homes for him right now, but certainly an interesting card. Clefairy, if you want to try out the new Clefable Dolls-based deck, can have this Metronome option where you can use it with Glimwood Tangle to copy some certain attacks, but you'd probably still play it in a split with the other Clefairies. Zapdos, I've said, is worth picking up at 1 count. It's essentially a 1-prize version of Cramorant for Lightning decks. Could potentially be even more interesting if you are trying to use it in Electrode-based builds as well. So something to bear in mind. Togekiss VMAX seems certainly very interesting. I know a lot of people are enamored by this card. I'm slightly concerned about its weakness, but it does boast a nice resistance to fighting. It also has free retreat and a pretty easy attack cost, so getting this to get handlock pieces for you throughout the game, or trying to get healing options over and over again with Togekiss VMAX is going to be something that a lot of people do work around. There's a ton of interesting one price stuff in this set. I don't think any of them are barnstorming, just because naturally, if you're a one prize deck, you always have the headache of ADP just GX attacking into you, and then you have to immediately deal with them, and that's not always an easy thing to do. Some of these decks may do it better than others, but in general, there's a lot of intrigue around these cards, and I'm sure we'll see some experimentation here and there. Donphan has really good early game pressure, good hit points as well on a one prize Pokemon that you can make even bulkier with the Stone Fighting Energy and tool cards and stuff like that, whilst also spreading to your own bench. This can be beneficial for the Fanfees themselves, or the Spiritombs that you can also try and combine with this card. You can also try and play straight Donphan if need be. It also obviously has decent type coverage with Eternatus and Lightning deck still being around. Whimsicott and Garbodor both seem interesting. You can try and build them together, or you can try and build them independently of one another. I think I've had more success as these two being independent tool-based decks, interestingly enough, where Garbodor is trying to use like a ton of Hapus, a ton of Cinccino's to instantly trash all the cards that you've just shuffled back into your deck, whereas Whimsicott is going to be much more about trying to spam U-turn board every single time to maintain a decent damage cap throughout the game for just one attachment. So both of these seemed like decent one prize decks for sure. Cramorant, if you are building around this, you need to get the 4 Arrokudas as well, and Barraskewda kind of also goes in that deck as sort of one little mini package. Seems like a fun rogue deck. You have some decent damage going for you, a 60 multiplier on 4 Arrokudas, not too shabby, especially with twin energies, and targeted skewer being an option with Barraskewda. Also could be pretty interesting. It's going to be a strange build around, and it's not going to be necessarily the most consistent deck, because you naturally need to commit so much of your board space to Arrokudas turn by turn, but certainly something interesting there. Charizard's a deck I've already profiled on the channel. A lot of the cards I'm talking about on this slide and the previous one I will be eventually covering, so don't worry about that. The videos are on their way. Charizard is already on the channel though. I really do like that ability, and its attack obviously scales very well into the late game, so I'm sure we'll see a lot of Charizard on the ladder, and it's a great budget pickup because you can just pick up those theme decks and get building around that really, which I think is really awesome to have, to be honest. Dusknoir has that super interesting ability. There's already a Duskull that can go ahead and search out the deck for Dusclops and Dusknoir, so I can certainly foresee this being like a 1-1-1 line in certain decks if we ever get to a point where special energies are sort of running the format, or in enough decks where you can be a disruptive line in the deck, so that's pretty cool. Bennett seems to have this annoying ability that could end up being paired with Zacian to try and have a better time against some VMAX matchups where you're hitting them once with a Brave Blade and then trying to do that Curse of Devolution to force them back into their hand to essentially take knockouts, which could be pretty awesome. I do think it has a bit of an awkward time against the Luke Metal and ADP matchups, so it's going to be on the rogue side of things, but Bennett seems interesting there. And later down the line, I can also see this being a useful card, so worth picking up a few of them. Trumbeak, I think, is going to be on the rogue side of things. I don't think it's a build-around engine for the most part, because it just eats into too many spaces, and you're only seeing 3 cards from its ability each time, which is quite low impact, even if you are trying to use like a Rangaroo alongside it. But it can be universal energy acceleration, so I shouldn't really doubt it too much. People may find a way. For the final Pokemon, I've said 2 of each of the Evolutions. I think we have a better Eevee in the format than the new Eevee coming out. The new Eevee coming out has 70 hit points, but its attacks aren't all that useful. You may think that outweighs the 60 hit points with a decent attack option from our current Eevees in the format. That's really up to you, but I wouldn't really get more than 2 of each of these, and I probably wouldn't get more than 3 of the Eevee from this set, and I think it could even be worse than the current Eevees that we have in the format. So just a quick thing there, they are quite type situational, but these are things that can shut down decks coming out in the future, so just a future proof yourself, you may want to pick up some of these. I do think these are a far cry away from Garbodor, but still ones you can bear in mind. A few other cards then, trainer-wise, that I don't think are necessary pickups immediately, but do have some solid potential. Opal is coin flip based, so I'm already kind of against it just as a personal thing, but I'm sure some people will look to this card if they don't feel like Marnie, for example, is enough powerful draw in their own deck, or they feel like Rosa or other options are too slow, so Opal could go alongside Professor's Research in certain archetypes if need be, or it could end up being that sort of like 10th, 11th spot of draw support cards in your deck if you really want to. Same thing for Alistair, really. It can be some additional draw support if need be in decks that have discard synergy. I can foresee this card sort of weaving in, kind of being challenged by the likes of Hapu and Sinlin. At the moment, I think Alistair kind of loses that battle, but extra discard synergy is sometimes welcomed by decks, so that's why he's on here. B, at the moment, I don't think it's good. Like, I really don't think that like a straight Surfetched kind of deck is going to be in sort of tier 2. I think B only really works in an archetype like that right now, but it does have a good amount of future potential. We have to keep looking back at this card whenever new fighting Pokemon are revealed. Since we saw the reveal of End's Resolve, it really hasn't done much in the format, so I am still skeptical. But B can also grab you special energy cards. Don't forget that. It doesn't have to be basic fightings. It can be, you know, any type of energy at all as long as it's to a fighting Pokemon. So there is some versatility behind her, so it's one to have in the back pocket sometimes. Memory Capsule's a pretty interesting item card. I can see it going into a handful of archetypes. If you want to try out the new Clefable Rogue deck, it may end up making its way into Domfan. I don't think it's all that good, though. And it's obviously decent for the evolutions as well. But this is, again, a future-proofing card that you may want to grab while you can. Wash Energy, I think, is pretty poor. And I do think most water decks are going to be Frostmoth-based, even going into the future. But it does have interesting text, and it might be one just to have in the back of the binder as well, if need be. And finally, Chichester Bath to reduce 20. Could potentially be good in Luke Metal. I'm kind of wrestling with this card and with Swell and seeing which one I like more, especially because you don't have that many spaces in the deck to commit to stadiums in Luke Metal. So at the moment, I'm still leaning more towards the Swell than Chichester Bath, but something to bear in mind. And this card, just in general, can be nice for certain breakpoints of damage. Just keep your basics that much tankier, and if there are more and more VMAX decks in the format, your opponent can't really cash in on that same effect. So it's basically like a one-sided stadium in your favor a lot of the time. So that's something to bear in mind, and I do think it's an interesting one for the future. That's it though, guys. Hope you did enjoy the buy list. Like I said, not too many core essentials, and if you're not a fan of the Colossal deck, it's going to be a really easy set for you to try and pick up. The Jirachi Amazing Rare, probably the hardest thing to try and accumulate, even online and in person, but other than that, quite an easy one for us, and also quite a lot to explore on this page as well. I was surprised by how populated I was able to make the Believer buy list, but there's a lot of one-prize stuff that I'm sure a lot of people are going to have fun with, and some unexplored potential here as well from potentially Togekiss and Orbeetle, which can give those experimenters among you a lot of time. Well, you can end up sinking a lot of time into those archetypes as well, which could be a lot of fun if you can make it work. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy, and I will see you for another video tomorrow. Cheers.